Hello friends. I can see 80% of my viewers don't subscribe while watching videos. Please hit the subscribe button and like this video. Press that bell icon for notifications. And tell me in the comments from which city you are watching this video. My name is Sylvia Harrow, and this is the story of how one teacher's cruelty became the fuel for my entire life's mission. Have you ever had someone look you straight in the eyes and tell you that your dreams are impossible? Have you ever felt the crushing weight of an adult's words, designed specifically to destroy the hope burning in your teenage heart? I have. When I was 17 years old, I stood in front of my English classroom on a Tuesday morning in October. The autumn leaves were falling outside the windows, painting the small town of Millbrook in shades of amber and gold. Inside that classroom, my heart was racing with the kind of excitement that only comes from sharing something you believe in with your whole soul. I had just finished reading my latest short story to the class. It was about a young woman who travels to distant countries, writing about the people she meets and the cultures she discovers. The protagonist was fearless, adventurous, everything I desperately wanted to become. As I closed my notebook, I looked directly at Mr. Harding. He was sitting behind his desk, his fingers steepled in front of him, wearing that expression I had grown to recognize over the months. It was the look he gave whenever he was about to deliver what he called reality checks to his students. But I was 17, and 17-year-olds believe in magic. So I took a deep breath, and I said the words that would change everything. One day, I am going to be a writer. I will travel the world, and people will know my name. The classroom fell silent. 28 pairs of eyes turned toward Mr. Harding, waiting for his response. I stood there, my hands trembling slightly, but my voice had been steady. I had meant every single word. Mr. Harding leaned back in his chair. A slow, cruel smirk spread across his face. He looked me up and down, as if he was examining some pathetic creature that had wandered into his domain. And then he spoke. "Sylvia Harrow," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Girls like you do not leave this town. You will stay here, marry some local boy, work at the diner or the grocery store, and spend the rest of your life talking about dreams that never happened." The words hit me like physical blows. I felt my face flush with heat, my chest tighten with humiliation. But Mr. Harding was not finished. "Writing is for people with real talent," he continued. "People who come from families with connections. People who understand the world beyond this place. You are a small-town girl with small-town dreams. It is better to accept that now than to waste years chasing something you will never achieve." The class erupted in nervous laughter. Some of my classmates looked uncomfortable, but others were nodding along with Mr. Harding's assessment. I could hear whispers behind me, agreements that maybe he was right. Maybe I was being ridiculous. I sat down in my seat, my cheeks burning with shame and rage. My hands were shaking so violently I had to clasp them together under my desk. Tears threatened to spill from my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of him, not in front of anyone, but inside my chest. Something was happening, something Mr. Harding could never have anticipated. Instead of crushing my spirit, his words were forging something unbreakable within me. As I sat there listening to the laughter die down, as I watched him return to his lesson plan as if nothing significant had happened, I made a silent vow. "Watch me." Those two words became my mantra. They echoed in my mind as I walked home that afternoon, as I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, as I woke up the next morning with a determination I had never felt before. Watch me. I began to plan my escape from Millbrook that very day. The next few months were a blur of applications and research. I spent every free moment in the school library, learning about colleges with strong writing programs, scholarship opportunities, anything that could help me build a bridge out of that small town and into the world I knew was waiting for me. My parents were supportive, but worried. They had lived in Millbrook their entire lives. The idea of their daughter leaving for some big city university, pursuing a career that seemed so uncertain, it frightened them. But they saw the fire in my eyes, and they knew better than to try to extinguish it. Just have a backup plan. My mother would say whenever we talked about my future. Maybe teaching, or nursing. something stable. But I did not want stable. I wanted extraordinary. When graduation day arrived, I walked across that stage with acceptance letters to 3 universities in my purse and a partial scholarship to cover tuition. Mr. Harding was there, watching from the faculty section, but when our eyes met, I did not look away. I stared right at him, and I smiled. That summer, I worked 2 jobs to save money for college. I cleaned houses in the morning and waited tables at the local diner at night. Every dollar I earned went into my college fund. Every hour brought me closer to my escape. The people in town began to take notice of my determination. Some admired it. Others thought I was setting myself up for failure. I heard the whispers at the grocery store. The speculations about how long it would take before I came crawling back home. That Harrow girl thinks she is too good for Millbrook. I heard Mrs. Patterson say to Mrs. Chun while they waited in line at the bank, "She will be back within a year, mark my words." But their doubts only fueled my resolve. In August, my parents drove me to State University. It was 3 hours away from Millbrook, but it might as well have been on another planet. As we pulled up to my dormitory, I felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration that took my breath away. This was it. This was my chance. College was harder than I had imagined, not just academically, but financially and emotionally. While other students seemed to have endless support from home, I was working 3 part-time jobs just to keep up with expenses. I cleaned office buildings at 5 in the morning before my first class. I tutored struggling students in the afternoons. I worked at a coffee shop near campus on weekends. My schedule was brutal, but every paycheck brought me closer to independence. My professors in the journalism program were tough but encouraging. They saw something in my writing, a raw passion that could be refined into real skill. I threw myself into every assignment, every opportunity to improve. But the rejection started early. I began submitting articles to magazines and newspapers during my sophomore year. For every piece I sent out, I received form letters thanking me for my interest, but informing me that my work was not quite what they were looking for. The pile of rejection letters grew taller on my desk. Sometimes, late at night when I was exhausted from work and studying, I would look at that pile and wonder if Mr. Harding had been right. Maybe I was delusional. Maybe I was wasting my time chasing something that would never happen. But then I would remember his smirk, his certainty that I would never amount to anything. And the fire would reignite inside me. Watch me, I would whisper to myself. Just watch me. During my junior year, something shifted. My writing professor, Dr. Martinez, pulled me aside after class one day. "Sylvia," she said, "you have been holding back. I can feel it in your writing. You are playing it safe, trying to write what you think people want to read. But your best work, the pieces that make me sit up and take notice, those are the ones where you write from your heart, where you tell your truth." That conversation changed everything. I stopped trying to write what I thought editors wanted, and started writing what I needed to say. I wrote about growing up in a small town where dreams were seen as dangerous. I wrote about working multiple jobs and falling asleep over textbooks. I wrote about the fear and excitement of chasing something bigger than yourself. And slowly, miraculously, the acceptances started coming. First, a small literary magazine published one of my personal essays. Then a regional newspaper picked up a piece about college students working to pay their own way. Each published piece felt like a small victory. Proof that maybe I was not as delusional as everyone thought. After graduation, I moved to Chicago with $800 in my bank account and a fierce determination to make it as a writer. I found a tiny studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood and took a job at a marketing firm to pay the bills. But every evening after work, every weekend, every spare moment I had, I was writing. I pitched story ideas to magazines. I applied for freelance assignments. I attended networking events where I felt completely out of place, but forced myself to make connections anyway. The rejections continued to pour in, but so did the occasional acceptance. Slowly, painfully, I built a portfolio of published work. 3 years after college, I landed my first major assignment. A national magazine wanted me to write a feature about young people leaving small towns for big city dreams. The irony was not lost on me. I spent weeks researching and interviewing, but when it came time to write the piece, I knew I had to include my own story. I wrote about Mr. Harding, about his prediction that I would never leave Millbrook, about the moment his cruelty became my motivation. The article was published with my byline on the cover. My phone started ringing with requests for more work. Editors who had never heard of me suddenly wanted to know what other stories I could tell. That article launched my career in ways I could never have imagined. Over the next few years, my byline appeared in major magazines and newspapers across the country. I wrote about social issues, human interest stories, cultural trends. I interviewed celebrities and politicians, covered breaking news, traveled to places I had only dreamed about as a teenager. And then I decided to write a book. The book was a memoir, a deep dive into what it means to leave everything familiar behind in pursuit of something unknown. I wrote about growing up in Millbrook, about Mr. Harding's prediction, about the journey from that humiliated 17-year-old to the woman I had become. Finding a publisher was almost as difficult as breaking into journalism had been. The rejections felt familiar, but by then I had learned to see them as stepping stones rather than roadblocks. When the acceptance finally came, when I held that book contract in my hands, I cried. Not tears of sadness or frustration, but tears of pure, overwhelming joy. The book was published on a Tuesday in March, exactly 10 years after I had graduated from high school. I was 31 years old, living in New York City, with a career that exceeded even my wildest teenage dreams. But I was not prepared for what happened next. The book took off like wildfire. It resonated with readers who had their own stories of being underestimated, their own moments of proving doubters wrong. Within weeks, it was climbing bestseller lists. Within months, it was being translated into other languages. Suddenly, I was not just a writer anymore. I was an author, a best-selling author. The girl who was told she would never leave her small town was now traveling the world, speaking at conferences and book festivals, living a life that was beyond anything I had dared to imagine. The speaking invitations started pouring in. Universities wanted me to address their graduating classes. Corporations wanted me to talk to their employees about overcoming obstacles. Women's organizations wanted me to share my story of persistence and self-belief. I said yes to everything I could. Every stage I stepped onto, every microphone I spoke into, felt like another small victory against the voice that had once told me I was not good enough. For 3 years, I lived in this whirlwind of success. I had apartments in New York and Los Angeles. I traveled to Europe for book tours, to Asia for speaking engagements. My name was recognized in literary circles. My opinions were sought by journalists and talk show hosts. I had not thought about Mr. Harding in years. Millbrook felt like a different lifetime, a story I told about someone else's childhood. I was so busy building my future that I rarely looked back at my past. And then the invitation arrived. It came on official letterhead from Millbrook High School. The return address alone made my heart skip a beat. I almost threw it away without opening it. But curiosity won. Dear Ms. Harrow, it began. We would be honored if you would consider returning to Millbrook High School as the keynote speaker for our centennial celebration. As one of our most distinguished alumni, your presence would mean the world to our current students and the entire community. Distinguished alumni. The words felt surreal. I set the letter down on my kitchen counter and stared at it for a long time. The idea of returning to Millbrook, of walking back into that school, of potentially seeing Mr. Harding again. It filled me with a complex mixture of emotions I could not untangle. Part of me wanted to decline immediately. I had moved beyond that place, beyond those people who had doubted me. Why should I go back? But another part of me, the part that still carried the memory of that humiliated 17-year-old girl, whispered something different. This is your chance, it said. This is your moment to close the circle. I called my agent to discuss the invitation. She was practical, as always. What do you get out of it? She asked. The speaking fee will be minimal, if there is one at all. Your time would be better spent on the corporate gigs that are lined up. But this was not about money. This was about something much more valuable. I need to do this. I told her. I cannot explain why, but I need to do this. I called the school the next day and accepted their invitation. The weeks leading up to the event were filled with a nervous energy I had not felt in years. I found myself thinking about Millbrook, about the people I had left behind, about who I might encounter when I returned. I wondered if Mr. Harding still taught there. He would be in his 60s now, probably near retirement. Would he remember me? Would he remember what he had said all those years ago? More importantly, how would I feel seeing him again? The night before I was scheduled to speak, I flew into the regional airport 40 minutes from Millbrook. As the plane descended, I could see the familiar landscape below me, the same rolling hills, the same patchwork of farms and small neighborhoods, the same main street that had once felt like the entire world. But now, looking down from 30,000 feet, it seemed impossibly small. I rented a car and drove to the hotel where the school had arranged for me to stay. It was the newest building in town, which meant it had probably been built sometime in the 1990s. Everything else looked exactly the same as I remembered. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed rehearsing my speech, but also preparing myself emotionally for what the next day might bring. I had given hundreds of speeches by then. I could talk about overcoming adversity and chasing dreams in my sleep. But this felt different. This felt personal in a way that no other speaking engagement ever had. The next morning, I dressed carefully. I chose a navy blue dress that was professional but approachable, paired with a blazer that made me feel confident and authoritative. I looked at myself in the mirror and tried to see what the people in Millbrook would see. Would they see the successful author, the woman who had proven all their predictions wrong? Or would they still see that small-town girl who had gotten too big for her britches? The school had not changed much from the outside. The same brick facade, the same metal lettering spelling out Millbrook High School above the main entrance. But as I walked through those doors, I felt like I was stepping into a time machine. The hallways smelled exactly the same. That unique combination of cleaning supplies and teenage energy that exists in every high school in America. The lockers were the same forest green they had been when I was a student. Even the trophy cases looked largely unchanged. The current principal, a woman named Dr. Foster, met me at the entrance. She was warm and enthusiastic, clearly excited about having a celebrity back at the school. As she gave me a brief tour before the assembly, I found myself looking for familiar faces among the faculty. And then I saw him. Mr. Harding was standing outside what I assumed was still the English department office. He was older, grayer, with lines around his eyes that had not been there 15 years earlier. But there was no mistaking him. Our eyes met across the hallway. For a moment, neither of us moved. I felt that familiar churning in my stomach, the same feeling I had experienced as a 17-year-old sitting in his classroom. But this time, I did not look away. He nodded slightly, an acknowledgement more than a greeting. I nodded back, maintaining eye contact until he turned and walked into his office. "That is Mr. Harding," Dr. Foster said, noticing the interaction. "He has been here longer than anyone. 42 years of teaching. He will be retiring at the end of this year." 42 years. That meant he had been teaching for 27 years when I was his student. How many other dreams had he crushed in those decades? How many other students had he told they would never amount to anything? The assembly was being held in the gymnasium, the same space where I had attended pep rallies and graduation ceremonies as a student. But now, it was decorated with banners celebrating the school's 100-year history. The bleachers were packed with students, faculty, and community members who had come to hear the local girl made good. As Dr. Foster introduced me, I scanned the crowd from behind the makeshift curtain they had set up backstage. I could see my parents in the third row, beaming with pride. I could see former classmates, some of whom I barely recognized. And there, in the front row of the faculty section, sat Mr. Harding. He was watching me with an expression I could not read. Not hostile, but not friendly either. Just watchful. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Foster's voice rang out across the gymnasium. "Please welcome back our distinguished alumna, best-selling author, Sylvia Harrow." The applause was thunderous. It filled the space in a way that made my chest tight with emotion. These people, many of whom had once doubted me, were now celebrating my success. I walked to the podium, my heart pounding but my steps steady. I had given this speech dozens of times, but never to an audience that meant so much to me. I began with the usual pleasantries, thanking them for the invitation, expressing how honored I felt to be back. But then I shifted into the heart of my message. I spoke about the importance of believing in yourself, even when others do not believe in you. I talked about the value of hard work, of persistence, of refusing to accept other people's limitations as your own. I told them about my journey, about leaving Millbrook with $800 and a dream, about the rejections and the late nights and the moments when I wondered if I was crazy to think I could make it as a writer. The audience was captivated. I could see students leaning forward in their seats, hanging on every word. I could see parents nudging each other, recognizing their own children's dreams in my story. And then I came to the moment I had been building toward. I let the silence settle over the gymnasium. When I spoke again, my voice was clear and strong. 15 years ago, I said, I stood in a classroom in this very building. I had just shared a story I had written, and I told my teacher about my dreams. I said that one day, I was going to be a writer. I said I would travel the world, and people would know my name. I could feel the energy in the room shift. People were sitting up straighter, sensing that something important was about to happen. That teacher looked at me. I continued, and he told me that girls like me do not leave this town. He said I would stay here, marry, and spend my life talking about dreams that never happened. A murmur ran through the crowd. I could see people turning to look at each other, some of them clearly remembering similar moments from their own school experiences. I looked directly at Mr. Harding as I spoke the next words. He was wrong.